Subscribe to take your place in this universe full of science fiction and horror stories, and go after the unknown. Because some truths are hidden in the dark. The sky burned red the night they abandoned us. A deep, seething crimson, as if the heavens themselves were bleeding, reflecting the last remnants of daylight against the towering clouds. The ships never landed. They hung in the sky like silent executioners, their massive hulls glinting with distant starlight, indifferent to the lives they were about to discard. One by one, the pods descended. Small, fragile things, coffins, not vessels. They scattered across the horizon, swallowed by the vastness of an unfamiliar world. There were no goodbyes, no explanations, no warnings. Just gravity, fate, and the sickening realization that none of us had a choice. The impact was merciless. The ground cracked beneath the weight of our arrival, swallowing some of us before they could even scream. Others were thrown from their pods, their bodies twisting in unnatural angles, bones jutting through flesh. I saw a man crawl from the wreckage, his arm bent the wrong way, his face frozen in a mixture of disbelief and resignation. He didn't cry out. He didn't need to. The horror in his eyes was enough. We had no time to grieve. The air was thick, heavy with an acrid tang that stung the throat and burned the lungs. Some collapsed the moment they unsealed their helmets, clutching at their throats, gasping like fish pulled from water. Their lips turned gray first, then blue, their eyes rolling back into their skulls before they went still. The rest of us learned quickly, breathe too deep, and the poison took you slow. We tore fabric from what little clothing we had, dampened it with sweat, blood, or the last remnants of the emergency rations in our suits. It wasn't perfect, but it bought us time. Survival was a lesson we had to learn fast. The landscape stretched endlessly, a barren mix of jagged rock and thick, twisted foliage. The plants glowed faintly in the darkness, pulsing with an eerie bioluminescence. They looked almost beautiful until the first man ate one. His screams lasted 3 hours. His body lasted 2. By dawn, all that remained of him was a dark stain on the ground and the lesson he left behind. We marked the deadly plants with the blood of the fallen, a silent warning to the desperate. Then came the creatures. At first, they only watched. Pale, luminous eyes gleamed from the shadows beyond our crude shelters, unblinking, patient. We told ourselves they were just scavengers, waiting for us to die so they could feed. We were wrong. The first attack came without warning. A woman named Kieran was gathering leaves, ones we had deemed safe, when something lunged from the underbrush. There was no time to react, no time to scream. One moment, she was there. The next, she was gone. We searched for her body. We never found it. The next night, they came again. A man named Darius disappeared from his watch post. His rifle was still loaded. His footprints ended abruptly, as if he had been lifted from the ground. They were not mindless predators. That was the most terrifying part. They learned. They studied us, probing for weaknesses, striking where we were most vulnerable. They took the slow first, the sick, the wounded. We stopped hearing their screams after a while. We stopped looking for bodies. By the time the second generation was born, we weren't just survivors. We were predators. The children of this world never knew the softness of Earth. They never felt the warmth of the sun on their skin, never breathed air that did not bite at the lungs. To them, this was normal. They did not fear the creatures in the dark. They hunted them. Their lungs drank the poison of the atmosphere as if it were pure. Their hands, calloused from birth, carved weapons from the bones of our enemies. The first generation told them stories of another world, one where water ran clean, where food grew from the soil, where the sky was not a twisted mass of shifting colors. They listened, but they did not understand. To them, those stories were myths, fairy tales whispered by ghosts. We had been sent here to die. Instead, we became something else. And then, years later, when we had forgotten the cold metal of the ships that left us behind, they returned. The dead did not rest here. This world refused stillness, denied finality. It devoured everything, breaking bodies down in ways we still didn't understand. No scent of rot ever lingered. No flies buzzed over corpses. No scavengers picked at the remains. The earth itself swallowed them, bones stripped bare within days, flesh reduced to nothing more than a memory. A man could die at dusk, and by dawn, the land would have consumed him, as though he had never walked it at all. The first generation tried to fight it. They clung to old rituals, to graves marked with stones that would vanish by morning. They whispered the names of the fallen, carving them into the brittle bark of trees that pulsed as if they were alive. They built small memorials, only to find them overturned, trampled, or worse, moved. We learned not to waste the dead. Their bodies became part of our survival. The bones of the fallen were sharpened into blades, their skulls stripped clean and used as bowls, their sinew bound into cord. It was not an easy thing at first. The thought of carving into a body that had once spoken, once fought beside us, made even the hardest among us hesitate. But necessity did not care for sentimentality. The second generation understood that from the beginning. The boy in front of me, Taryn, one of the second-born, worked with a quiet efficiency, scraping a jagged blade against the remains of a scavenged ribcage. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. His hands were steady, his expression unreadable. I crouched beside him. We should mark the site. He didn't stop working. Why? His voice held no malice, no rebellion. Just curiosity, as if I had suggested something odd, something unnecessary. I had no answer. We had stopped using names for the dead long ago. Taryn finished stripping the bone and set it aside, lifting his gaze to the horizon. The sky above us churned, deep red bleeding into violet, the swirling clouds shifting in unnatural currents. The wind carried something beneath its breath, a distant sound, something between a shriek and a growl. Not human, not close. I saw no fear in Taryn's face, only calculation. He had never known a world where men could afford fear. The creatures had once hunted us with impunity, but they had learned, just as we had. We had begun to anticipate their movements, to recognize the subtle signs of their presence. They had watched us carve weapons from their fallen, had seen us set traps that turned their own instincts against them. They still came, still tested us, but now they hesitated at the edges of our domain. They feared us now, the same way we had once feared them. But something else had entered our territory, something worse. The air changed first, a shift, subtle, yet undeniable, like the moment before a storm breaks. A low hum vibrated through the ground, rippling through the dirt beneath my feet. Taryn stiffened, tilting his head like an animal scenting the wind. Others had begun to notice too, lifting their heads, scanning the sky. Then the shadow fell. A streak of metal cut through the heavens, sleek and deliberate, descending with the grace of something that had never known fear. The ship was smaller than the ones that had abandoned us, but no less ominous. Its surface gleamed with an artificial smoothness, reflecting the churning red of the sky. It did not drift. It did not falter. It descended, straight and deliberate, carving a path toward the land we had claimed as our own. A dozen figures gathered behind me, silent, waiting. The second generation did not ask me what it was. They had never seen ships before. They had only known this place, this poisoned world, where the sky bled and the ground devoured. They did not look to me for answers. They looked to the ship, to the unknown. To them, it was not a return. It was an intrusion. I clenched my fists, staring at the vessel as it slowed, hovering just above the ground. It was close enough now that I could see its surface, a pristine silver unmarred by time, smooth as glass. No markings, no insignias, no warnings. For years, we had been ghosts to them, lost, presumed dead, discarded like waste. They had not expected us to survive. They had not imagined we could thrive. But now they knew, and they had come to see what they had created. The ground trembled as the ship released a pulse of energy, sending dust spiraling into the air. The creatures that had lingered in the distance shrieked and scattered, vanishing into the darkness. I could feel it in my bones. This was not a rescue. Taryn stood beside me, still holding the bone blade he had been working on. His fingers flexed around the weapon's grip. Are they like us? I exhaled slowly. They were. I do not know if that was still true. The ship did not descend. It claimed the air. A monolithic shape, cold and metallic, its sleek surface swallowing the red light of the sky without reflection. It moved as if gravity itself bowed to its will, a predator choosing its moment to strike. The wind recoiled from it. The ground seemed to hold its breath. Even the trees, twisted things that pulsed like living muscle, seemed to shrink back from its presence. The air pulsed with static, a deep hum reverberating in my bones. Something ancient inside me recoiled. This was not the arrival of men. This was the return of gods who had forgotten they were no longer worshipped. Terran stood at my side, blade in hand. He had never seen machines like this. None of them had. The second generation had been born in fire and dust, in hunger and war. Their hands had shaped weapons from bone and sinew. Their eyes had only ever looked up at a sky that gave no mercy. They did not fear the unknown. They measured it, waited, and prepared to kill it if necessary. The first vibration hit my skin before the ship exhaled. A hiss of pressurized air, sharp and deliberate, like a beast scenting the air before a hunt. A ramp unfolded from the ship's underbelly, slow and precise, each movement calculated, rehearsed. The first footstep made no sound. Then they came. Not monsters, not machines, people. At least they had been once. They moved with a precision that was unnatural, every motion too smooth, too perfect. Armor of seamless black covered their bodies, fitted with a level of craftsmanship that bordered on art. Their helmets had no distinct visors, only a single horizontal slit of dark glass that reflected the crimson sky. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, no wasted motion. But something was wrong. The way they scanned us, not as one scans a threat, but as one examines an anomaly, made my skin tighten. They had expected something different. I took a step forward. "Why are you here?" A pause. Then the voice, flat, mechanical, filtered through some unseen device. "You are alive." It was not a question. I felt the heat of my people behind me. Their tension coiled like a drawn bow. Terran's grip tightened on his weapon, but he did not lunge. Not yet. I exhaled slowly. "No thanks to you." Silence. Then, the second figure spoke. A woman, I thought, though the voice carried the same unnatural detachment. "We thought you were lost." A dry, humorless laugh escaped me. "You didn't think? You didn't care." The lead figure stepped closer. The second generation did not move, but I felt the shift in their stance. Their fingers curled around weapons crafted from creatures that had once hunted us. Their gazes, sharp as stone knives, measured these newcomers and found them lacking. "We have come to assess the situation," the man said. Terran broke his silence. "What situation?" The woman turned toward him, head tilting slightly. "Your existence." The word slid into the air like a blade drawn slowly from a sheath. My pulse thrummed. And if we weren't alive? The hesitation was brief, but it was there. That was my answer. I stepped closer, matching the distance the soldier had taken. "We're not the first thing that's tried to erase us. And we won't be the last thing standing." The woman exhaled, a controlled breath, deliberate. "You misunderstand." A thin, sharp smile pulled at my lips. "Do I?" She studied me for a moment. Then, quietly, she said, "You are not what we left behind." The words landed heavier than she meant them to. I saw it in the way her fingers curled slightly at her sides, in a nearly imperceptible shift in the others as they processed what stood before them. They had expected something different. And in that moment, I knew why they were here. Not to rescue us. Not even to eliminate us. To study us. A slow, creeping understanding settled in my chest. We were not survivors to them. We were specimens. An experiment whose results had veered into the unknown. Terran caught the shift as well. His weight adjusted, the readiness of a man who had never known peace. The second generation did not understand the council, or the worlds we had been stolen from. But they understood hunters. They understood prey. And they did not intend to be the latter. The lead soldier finally broke the silence. "A larger force will arrive soon. A test. A warning. A challenge." Terran smiled. It was not a pleasant thing. I let the moment stretch, let the weight of what we had become sink into the air between us. Then, with a slow breath, I met the man's visor and said, "Then you should ask yourself, are you ready?" The sky split open, and the second ship descended. It moved with the same controlled arrogance as the first, slipping through the storm-heavy clouds with unnatural precision. The air around it warped, heavy with static, the kind that made hair stand on end, that turned breath shallow. Something had changed. I knew it. The soldiers knew it. They had expected a correction, a return to order. Instead, they were standing on unstable ground, both figuratively and literally. The planet pulsed beneath us again, a deep tremor rolling through the hardened dirt, not violent enough to crack the surface, but strong enough to be felt in the bones. The lead soldier shifted. It was subtle, too slight for anyone but someone watching him closely. But I saw it. The exiles did not flinch. The second generation did not so much as tighten their grip. They had felt this before. The soldiers, however, had not. A new voice crackled through their comms, deep, clipped, commanding. Not the same one as before. This one carried more weight, the tone of someone who gave orders, not just follow them. Secure the area. Confirm status. Stand by for further instruction. That was enough. They had not come to negotiate. I exhaled, slow and measured, locking eyes with the faceless visor in front of me. "You brought more of you." The lead soldier didn't respond. His stance was still rigid, but I could see it now, the shift in his shoulders, the almost imperceptible tightness in his hands. He had expected this to be easy. It wouldn't be. Terran took a step forward, blade loose in his grip. He wasn't posturing, wasn't making a show of threat. He was simply waiting. The second generation didn't act unless I did, but Terran? He was different. He had never been taught restraint. His voice cut through the thick, humming air. "What happens if we don't comply?" Silence. A heartbeat. The lead soldier's head tilted slightly, as if calculating his response. "Then, it won't be your choice." Terran exhaled, sharp and quiet. "Wrong answer." The ground pulsed again, harder this time. The twisted trees lining the clearing trembled, their roots curling inward, like living things shrinking from something unseen. The wind carried a low vibration, not quite a sound, more like a presence. And then I heard it, a guttural growl, low and dragging, deep enough that I felt it in my chest before my ears processed it. It did not belong to anything human. It was not mechanical. It was something older, something hungry. The soldiers reacted first. Weapons lifted in unison, bodies tensing. They moved with the mechanical efficiency of men trained to eliminate problems before they became threats. I almost smiled. They thought their guns would protect them. They had no idea what waited in the dark. One of the soldiers, the one positioned furthest back, turned his head slightly toward the trees. He was the first to hear it properly. His grip on his weapon tightened. His stance, previously so controlled, shifted just slightly. Recognition. He knew what it was. And if he knew, that meant they all did. That meant the council had been here before. I turned back to the lead soldier, studying him. He had recovered, his posture unreadable. He was trained, more than the others. A different rank, perhaps, or maybe just more disciplined. But I had seen the reaction, brief as it was. He had not expected this. Good. Terran took another step forward, blade catching the light. "You should leave." The lead soldier's visor tilted toward me. He wanted me to be the one to speak first, to break first. I didn't. The moment stretched, brittle as bone. Then, finally, he exhaled, controlled, measured, as if reminding himself that he was still in control. Orders stand. A single, clipped sentence. No room for doubt. They would not leave. Then neither would we. I took a slow breath, rolling my shoulders back, muscles coiling. My body knew what came next. The second generation felt it too, the shift in pressure before the break. But just as I moved, just as the fight was about to begin, the world itself rebelled. The ground buckled. Not a tremor this time. A rupture. The earth cracked, deep and sudden, a jagged wound splitting through the clearing. Trees bent backward, wrenched from the soil. The low, guttural growl that had been lurking in the distance became a roar. Something was coming. And suddenly, we were not the only ones fighting. The ground did not shake. it split. The force of it was not a tremor, not a mere disruption of balance, but a deliberate, living thing. Cracks carved through the earth, jagged wounds bleeding dust and stone. The air pulsed, thick with an unseen weight, as if the planet itself had drawn in a slow, deep breath. The soldiers faltered, their once flawless formation frayed, their practiced movements thrown into hesitation. This was not an enemy they could subdue. It was not a force they could control. Something had been waiting beneath us, and now it had awakened. A roar, low and resonant, rolled through the clearing. Not human, not mechanical, something older. Then it rose. A form emerged from the fractured land, shifting, morphing, never settling into a singular shape. A mass of stone and twisted roots of sinew stretched through earth, as if the ground had not merely broken open, but had been unshackled. One of the soldiers fired. A sharp burst of energy snapped through the air, striking the shifting mass. It did nothing. The thing did not recoil, did not stagger. The impact disappeared, swallowed as though it had never been. That was when the soldiers panicked. Their discipline cracked, not all at once, but in subtle ways, a hand tightening too quickly around a rifle. The half-step backward before their training forced them still, the erratic flick of a visor scanning for something to anchor to. There was nothing. Terran did not hesitate. He had never hesitated. His blade was already in his hand, the bone edge catching the dim light. The second generation did not flinch, did not even tighten their grips. They had known, in some unspoken way, that this moment would come. The first soldier died without a sound. Not by us. By it. A limb, if it could even be called that, surged forward, a mass of shifting roots laced with the weight of stone. It struck without urgency, without rage, simply with certainty. The soldier barely had time to react before his body was torn through, armor folding like paper, flesh splitting apart in a clean, effortless motion. And then he was gone. The earth swallowed him, not in the way a body might sink into quicksand, nor the way a corpse might be buried by time. 1 second, he was there, the next he wasn't. No trace, no blood, as if the planet itself had erased the mistake of his presence. The remaining soldiers reacted instinctively. More gunfire, rapid and wild, a barrage meant for an enemy with rules, with a body that could be broken. The thing absorbed every blast. It moved forward. One of them turned and ran. Then another. The lead soldier stayed. Even as the ground shifted beneath him, even as his men abandoned him, he did not move. His visor locked onto me, and though his face was hidden, I could feel the weight of the question behind it. What have you done? But I had done nothing. This was not my doing. He exhaled. The sound filtered through his calm, controlled, measured. But this time, the control was forced. His fingers curled slightly, not in readiness, but in restraint. He wanted to react. But to what? His head tilted slightly. You don't control this. It was not a question. I met his gaze through the dark glass. Neither do you. The words landed between us like a stone thrown into still water. He understood. For the first time since he had stepped onto this world, I saw it in the way his stance shifted, the acceptance of something he had no protocol for. The planet had already decided. He turned, not toward the fight, not toward the thing that had risen against them, toward his ship, not a retreat, a decision. Terran watched as the last of them disappeared into the transports. The ships rose, engines rumbling low and guttural, the sound reverberating through my ribs. They did not fire, but they did not leave. They hovered unseen beyond the thick clouds, watching, calculating. They'll come back, Terran said. I nodded. Yes. But when they returned, it would not be the same. The lead soldier had left with more than just his life. He had left with an answer. They had abandoned us here, believing the planet would kill us. They had expected graves. Instead, we had become something else, something they could not reclaim. The ground beneath my feet shifted again, but this time it was different. Not violent, not a warning. It was a slow, steady movement, a settling. The thing that had risen from the earth did not retreat. It did not vanish. It lowered itself, folding back into the ground with the same quiet certainty that it had emerged with. It had done what it intended to do. It had not saved us. It had judged us, and we had been allowed to stay. The fissures in the ground sealed, the last traces of battle erased as though none of it had ever happened. No scars remained, no wreckage, no bodies. The planet had taken what it wanted, and it had left nothing behind. I exhaled, long and slow. For the first time, I understood. We were not its prisoners. We were its children.